Hey, folks, thanks for coming back and joining us. This is our fourth episode, and the second and third episode. Second one was Ken Humphrey, a great singer in Christian music. And then we had on our third episode, we had a friend of mine that used to play with Mid-South, Joe Cook, a great musician. And so we're going to kind of cover all aspects of the music business. And this one here is one that's kind of the technical part of it. When you hear a CD recording or something on the radio, guys like this guy right here I'm fixing to talk with are the main reason why it sounds so good. And I mean, you can have a good singer, you can have good musicians, and you can have good microphones and the instruments they play. But if you don't have somebody that knows what they're doing in the studio as far as engineering and then taking everything and mixing it and making it sound, mastering it, making it sound good, you have nothing but a rough sounding recording. So this is Rick Sandidge. How you doing, Rick?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Bobby?
I'm hanging in there like a hair and a biscuit, man.
Right.
What have you been doing with this coronavirus going on? A lot of people are shut down. They can't travel like me, they can't work. What have you been doing? Have you been just staying at home, or what have you been doing?
Well, I haven't changed much because I stay home most of the time anyway. I work from home. So I have a project studio in my home where I do most of my work. And yeah, I'm here in my studio at home. And so the only thing that's changed for me is my wife's home working all day too.
Yeah.
So.
And plus you can't go out to, other studios to do other things, recordings and things. So
yeah, luckily I had tracked a couple of new projects right before all this hit. And hopefully as soon as this is over, we'll be able to get the vocals done on that and get it mixed, get those mixed.
So have you gotten your stimulus check yet?
No, haven't.
I haven't either.
My
I'm
son, not stimulated yet.
Not stimulated yet. My son sent me a text just a few minutes ago and said he got his. I wondered if I got mine yet. So that's a little encouraging to know.
Yeah, it is.
I know somebody finally that got one. So
yeah, a friend of mine's daughter also got hers today. He said.
Yeah,
so.
I'm still waiting with bated breath. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means, bated breath, but anyway,
right.
It's just a saying.
Holding your breath.
Yeah, holding my breath. Speaking of recording and everything, back in 2009, I was just getting started with my family group going and going out and singing. I'd sung with Mid-South for 15 years, and I took about 4 or 5 years off the road and started working in my church with sound, which I took over after Rick quit. And then I started traveling, singing again with Ken Humphrey and his brother Jason with a group called Heritage Road. And then after I decided I wanted to go full time with it again, Rick had found out that I was starting to travel with my family and do some solo things. And so he called me and wanted to know if I could meet him for lunch. So we met, and he offered to do me a new recording. The first thing in my mind was, how much is this going to cost me?
Right.
But Rick, we've known each other about 20 plus years probably.
Yeah.
Rick said he wanted to help me make a good CD, and he totally offered all his services. He donated his services to me. And the only thing I had to pay for was studio time to do the tracks and the musicians, and any overdubs that were done. I had to pay those guys to do overdubs. Mm-hmm. But everything else, Rick donated. And it was a lot of time. I mean, I don't know how many hours you put in, but this is the project right here.
Right.
And this is probably one of the best sounding projects that I've ever been a part of right here. And it was because of that guy right there, Rick Sandidge. And Rick, thank you so much for doing that. I hope you don't get a bunch of phone calls saying, hey, will you donate some time for me?
I very rarely do that, to be honest.
Yeah, I know you do.
I
I'm
felt
telling
like the
you,
Lord wanted me to do that. So
I'm telling you, this project is top notch. And it's not because of my singing or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, that's a part of it. Right. But the process of recording and all that, all the time it takes to put in it. A lot of people just don't realize what it takes to record. But before we get into all that stuff, I just want to, everybody that I interview and talk about it, I want to hear their story of, first of all, tell us, where you were born. If you want to tell us what year, then we can just figure out how old you are after that. But Rick's older than dirt, so
Right.
he's been out there a long, long time. But just kind of start with that, and then talk about your influence, how old you were when you thought, well, I want to get in the music business. What happened? What got you started in that? So just start from the beginning. Go ahead, Rick.
All right. Well, I was born in Panama Canal Zone. My dad
Really?
was my dad was in the service down there at the time.
So you were born with John McCain down there.
Yep, I was. Same place.
Cool.
But yeah, and then as far as getting into the business, my family's not really all that musical. My mama used to sing in church some, but I didn't really grow up around it, and I was probably 21, 22 before I ever thought, hey, I might want to do this. I grew up kind of rough and was living out on my own, and I won't get into all the details, but I became a Christian during that time.
Yeah.
And I was, I'd been like most people during that time. I was, I was into drugs and doing things like that. And I became a Christian. I was by myself. I wasn't in a church, so I didn't even know any other Christians. And just by happenstance, I met a guy who was also a brand new Christian. He was a musician. His dad owned a music store I lived in a town called Reidsville, North Carolina. And his dad owned a music store there called Stadler Music. And I had thought, hey, I might want to learn how to play piano or something. I just, by happenstance, pulled in there one day after work, and he was in there. The owner's son, his name was Lenny Stadler, and he was a brand new Christian. We got to talking, and we just, kind of hit it off, because we were both kind of in the same boat. We didn't have a lot of friends our age that were Christians at the time, and he'd been playing with a rock group called Blackfoot at the time, and they lived there in that area, which a lot of people don't know, but they were there mainly because of him, and that was before they were known, basically, and he was struggling with whether to stay with them or leave and that sort of thing. Anyway, him and I hung out a lot, and he left the group, and then he had a friend that he used to play in clubs with that his family had a gospel group called the Volunteers, and so he was just going out with them on the weekends playing bass.
About what year was this, you think?
This would have been around 73,
okay,
72, 3, somewhere in there. And so I just go out with them on weekends, and that was my first exposure, really, to. Now I have to back up just a little bit. My best friend growing up was a guy named Gary Rogers, and he was a drummer. And him and his brother, they had a little band called the Starlighters, which was Gary Rogers, Mike Rogers' brother, a guy named we called Goose Jones was the bass player. Ken Wilkins played keyboards. Anyway, I used to hang out with them a lot too, like junior high and high school. So I was around. I didn't play.
You weren't actually in the band. You just kind of just hung out with them.
Hung out more of like a roadie type thing.
Okay.
I did do that, prior to that, but it never entered my mind that, hey, I could actually do this for a living,
Mm-hmm.
But then after I met Lenny and we were hanging out, there was a gospel group used to come into the music store that we got to know, and trying to think of their name right now. I can't think of their name, but anyway.
That's what happens when you get old. You can't
I
think
know
of
it.
things.
I know that. It's true. But it actually was Janet Pascal's family. It was Janet Pascal and Kay, her sister, and her dad. They had a little
Wow.
gospel group. They
That's
had a little gospel group.
way before she was with the Nealons.
Nobody knew who she was at the
Wow.
time, you know,
That's cool.
except for us. And she knew about a guy named Sammy Hall, who was a pop singer back in the 60s, who had become a Christian, was doing gospel music. And he had a similar testimony to mine and Lenny's. And so he was doing a crusade somewhere nearby, and she took us there to meet him. And so Sammy's family was playing and singing with him at the time. And so when Sammy met Lenny, he told him, he said his family's getting ready to go off the road, and he's putting a new band together. Wanted to know if Lenny would be interested. And Lenny said, sure, I'm interested. So anyway, that's how we met. And just a little backstory to that, our pastor, the little church we went to, his son played bass for the Hopper Brothers at the time. And the Hopper Brothers lived close by to where we were living. They were lived in Madison, North Carolina. We were in Reidsville, about 5 miles away. And then his son went to play with the Lefevres, and he's the one who told the Lefevres about Janet Pascal.
Wow. That's right. It was the Lefevres first, and then Rick Sandidge singers. Yeah.
That's how she came out, became kind of known from that.
Yeah.
Basically, right. But Dean Townsend is his name. And Dean went on, he played with Swaggart for years and stuff like that. I think he lives up in Pigeon Forge now. He's doing some stuff up there. But anyway, it's kind of, one of the advantages of being my age, I can kind of look back on my life, and I can see God's hand in my life and how he directed things and made things happen.
Yeah.
Had no idea at the time what was going on.
Oh yeah. We never do.
I know. I was just kind of following along, but I look back on it now and I can kind of see God's hand in my life and directing me and stuff. But anyway, so that try to make a long story shorter. Lenny wound up going with Sammy Hall later that year, and it was kind of hard on me because him and I had been hanging out a lot, and my pastor loved Southern gospel music, absolutely loved it. Used to have groups in all the time. First Southern gospel group I ever heard was the Hemphills.
Wow.
He had them into our church, which was Lawsonville Road Baptist Church, and he had a little radio show, a request show, where people could call in and request a record, and he'd play it. And that's really how I learned gospel music. I knew absolutely nothing about gospel music, but he would get me to come over. He was trying to keep me out of trouble, but he would get me to come over to the radio station and pull the records for him when somebody requested.
Uh-huh.
And that's how I got to know who the groups were and the names of them, stuff like that. The other thing he did that was kind of neat, because that was on the kind of the front end of more contemporary Christian music. And so when those records would come in, he would give them to me. He would say, I can't play these, but here, you might like this. So he'd hand me records. And I got people like Nancy Honeytree and Love Song and Randy Matthews and, Larry Norman.
He wouldn't play the contemporaries. He wouldn't play the contemporary stuff.
He was strictly Southern gospel.
Oh, yeah.
He absolutely loved Southern gospel. And, but that's kind of how I got introduced to that whole genre of music stuff. So anyway, a few months after when Sammy and them were when they were close by, I used to go hang out with them, maybe ride the bus with them for the weekend, that sort of thing. So probably, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months after Lenny had gone with Sammy, they called me and said, hey, Sammy needs a bus driver. Are you interested? And I was single and, wasn't doing nothing important. So I said, sure, I want to do it. So I took off and did that.
Had you ever driven a bus before?
No. One of the singers in the group, Rowena Jennings was her name. Her dad was a Trailways driver and had been for like 30 years or something, 20 or 30 years. And so he lived down in Mount Holly, North Carolina. So I had to go down and I actually went and lived at their house for about a week, and he taught me how to drive.
So back then there was no automatics.
No, it was not an automatic. No power steering either.
No power steering, 4-speed, double clutch.
Double clutch, everything,
yes,
right?
That's how I learned.
Yeah. That's how I learned. I learned to drive that thing, and he was great because I learned a lot of tips from him that a lot of people probably don't know, even people that can drive the bus. Because he was a trailways driver, he taught me stuff like how to put the brakes on without jerking everybody. When you have to come to a quick stop and stuff like that, and how to look ahead, way ahead, and make sure, because you can't stop those things on a dime.
No, you can't.
That sort of thing. So anyway, that's what I did. Well, I went on the road with them, and they were Sammy was a lot of people that don't, even people that normally tour, working with Sammy was a whole nother experience, because Sammy used to do crusades, and we would go into a town and we would do high school assembly programs during the day, and then do a program at night. And so we would set up and tear down 3 and 4 times a day.
Ooh,
and we'd do that we would do that 3 times a week. And then we'd go out and do the weekend, like the circuits, like Orel circuit and stuff like that, with the other groups on the weekends. So he worked all the time, where a lot of groups were going home during the week. We were just getting started. And so I got baptized by fire, basically. So
sure did.
and so back then there was no sound men or anything like that. So basically, I learned how to set up all the gear, help set up all the PA and everything. And then when they were sound checking, it was my job to stand out and listen and tell them what needed to be fixed and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I kind of developed an ear from that. Plus, the 2 guys in the group, Lenny Stadler, and the drummer, a guy named Mike Kane, they were avid listeners of music. Had every album imaginable on groups that you'd never heard of at the time. And especially Mike Kane. He was, I don't know if he still has his album collection, but he bought albums all the time. And so I would sit around and listen to albums with them, and they would be like, listen to that bass player. And I'm like, if you don't know to listen, you don't go, hey, you don't pick out the bass.
Right.
Most people listen to the song, they just hear the whole song. They don't hear the individual things.
No.
I learned from them how to listen to the individual things in a song, and also when it sounded good and when it didn't. I kind of learned to listen from those guys. And that's kind of how I developed my ear, was through that. And and so I did that, and then Sammy did 2 album projects in Nashville while I was only with Sammy about a year. And we did one for Skylight Sing, it was called, and we did that, I think, at Woodlawn in Nashville. And the band played on that. And then the second one we did was with Gary Paxton. And Gary, that was the first gospel album that Gary had ever produced. And Sammy knew Gary from the pop days. And Gary was a fairly recent Christian at the time and had written some gospel songs, but nobody would listen to what he had. And for people who don't know, Gary Paxton's a guy who wrote Monster Mash and Alley Oop.
Yeah.
And he's actually singing Alley Oop on that hit. But he was a character, Gary was. And but a great producer and great songwriter. And so I got to hang out in the studio while that was going on, especially with Gary. And I was very young at the time and knew hardly nothing about the process. But Gary was really, really nice to me. And I sat in the control room the whole time. He talked to me the whole time about what was going on and why he was doing what he was doing. And he would turn to me and ask me stuff. And I'm thinking, why is he asking me? I don't know anything. But a few years later, I was thinking about that, and I realize now why he was asking me, because he knew I heard the group every night. And so he knew I knew what they sounded like. So he would ask me questions, and related to that,
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that was a great experience for me. It really got me wanting to get into the recording process, and that's kind of what motivated me to do that. And then after I left Sammy, I got married. I moved back to North Carolina. Lenny had started another group. Went over there to work with them, and that didn't really work out. So I started my own record label, and I wanted to do some Christian rock stuff. So I started a record label called Sword Records back in the mid '70s, and I did several album projects in the '70s with different artists that most people didn't ever heard of. With so you might have heard of Don the Great. The first record I ever did was for Don the Great Delegation at the time, and Don and I are still friends. We've been friends for years. And then I cut a double album on a group called The Bridge at the time, and they were really a bunch of hippies that lived up in the house in Greensboro, and traveled on a bus and sang. Basically, they were like the pre-runners of praise and worship music.
Yeah.
And now this was in the late '70s, and the only music they would do was praise and worship. They wrote all their own songs and everything, but they had this whole philosophy about this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And they did
kind of ahead of their time.
Ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Right. In that respect. Yeah. So I did that. Then I did an album project for a guy named Barry McGee. Barry's still out singing and doing skits and stuff. And I met Barry. He was with the Hoppers for a while. And then he sang with Shekinah, which was the group Lenny started.
Uh-huh.
And then he went out on his own. And I did a record for Barry. And then after that, I did an album for a guy named Rob Castles. And that's where I met a guy named Steve Morris, which is he's now the guitar player for Deep Purple.
Oh.
But he had a band at the time called the Dixie Dregs. And then Steve Morris Band after that. And the Steve Morris Band still tours some when he's not on the road with Deep Purple.
Uh-huh.
I just saw Steve this past year.
Yeah.
He was here locally playing, and he plays with Neil Morris here some. They've got a group called Flying Colors. It's a real great band. It's like a super group.
So how long did the rock label, Christian rock label, last?
Till I started having kids and needed to make some money.
So you weren't making a killing on that stuff, huh?
No, I wasn't selling. I wasn't getting rich by any means.
What got you into more of the Southern gospel? You started a label called Mark V. What year was that?
Well, I didn't actually start Mark V.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No. Mark V was started by the Huffman brothers in 1961, I believe it was, and they had a recording studio in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I wound up. Long story short, I wound up, after I started the label, I got hired by a studio in North Augusta, which is right across the river from Augusta, and working in the studio. And that's really where I I had been doing recordings, but I was mainly in producer's role. Mm-hmm. But when I worked at that studio, I was there for about a year. It's where I learned how to engineer, and that was more out of necessity than want to. But there I worked with James Brown. I recorded James Brown there.
James Brown?
Yeah.
James Brown?
The James Brown.
Yeah. Good, that guy.
Yeah, that guy.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a long story.
It
was great. He was really nice, actually. I had been working. His drummer was a guy named Tony Cook, and Tony hung out in the studio all the time when he wasn't on the road. And James lived there in Augusta area. So Tony, we became good friends, and that's how that happened, basically. Wow. And it's really kind of an odd story, but what really happened was we got a call at the studio from Strom Thurmond's office. If you remember who Strom Thurmond was,
I do. Yes.
He was a Republican senator from the state of South Carolina.
Yep.
And James Brown was endorsing Strom Thurmond for re-election, and which a lot of people can't believe, but it's absolutely true.
That's when he was about 150 years old, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a while back.
He was there a long time.
He was. And anyway, they called the studio to book some time for James to come in and do a voiceover for the radio commercial. So, well, when James shows up, he shows up with his whole band. And they wanted to record it. He did the voiceover, then he wanted to record a song. So I recorded the song, mixed it and everything for him, and then send the bill to Strom Thurmond's office, and they call me up and go, what is this?
Yeah.
What's all this time for? And I said, well, James recorded a song while he was here. And he said, we're not paying for James to record a song. So I wound up getting stuck on that one because I never could get James. I used to go to their office every week to try to collect. I never could get my money. But anyway, I got my money back later in another way. That's another story.
Wow.
But anyway, I was there, and then I wound up moving up to Greenville, South Carolina, and one of the artists I recorded, Rob Castles, and his brother and I started a little studio in his basement, Rob's basement, and I was still trying to run the label and wasn't having a ton of success at it. But when we opened the studio up, it was like it just exploded with business. We were like wide open. Within a year or so, we had to move. We had to get a commercial building and move into it. And so really, I kind of, the label thing kind of went to the side, and because we were having kids at the time, and I needed to make money. So the studio was making money, nothing else was at the time. So we got in. We were in this one place for about 5 years, and the studio was doing really, really well. We were doing a lot of jingles, and I was cutting all kinds of stuff. I worked with Toy Caldwell from the Marshall Tucker Band, and Paul Riddle from the Marshall Tucker Band. He had him and some people a couple people you might know, Ronnie Godfrey and Ronnie's brother, and Frank Wilkie, who was Tucker Band's bass player. They used to do sessions for me a lot. And they had a little band on the side, a jazz band called the Throbbers. And I used to do records. I did 2 or 3 records for them. But we did a lot of, I was doing a lot of work there, and tons of commercials and some national commercials we did there and stuff. Thanks to a friend of ours called David Crossman, who was a jingle writer, and he was also a friend, kind of a family friend.
You say jingle. A lot of people don't know what that means. What is a jingle?
It's the music behind a commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you see a commercial on TV, or if you hear one on the radio, the song, the music for we did a lot of those. Music and lyric for the product or whatever they're trying to sell. Yeah. We did one called the Big Fat Yeast Roll for Quincy's back in the day when Quincy's was open.
Oh yeah, I remember Quincy's.
Yeah, we did a lot of Texas commercial. I think it was called Easy Off. It's So Easy. We did that.
Yeah.
The Buddy Holly take, and Photomat at the time. We did a big one for them. Hanes T-shirts. We did one for them, and so I did a lot of that kind of work, and was able to pull some. We did this one bank commercial. It was like a statewide bank in South Carolina, and R&B is real big in South Carolina, especially the old R&B. Mm-hmm. So I was able to get Bill Pickney and the Drifters in to do the jingle for us, which was great. Turned out great, and I wound up becoming friends with them. I did a couple of records for Bill Pickney and them over the years, and also did another record for a guy named Sonny Turner, and Sonny was the lead singer for the Platters. He was not the original. He was the guy that came after I think it was McFadden was his name. He was the original guy. And Sonny sang like Wash the Shore and With This Ring, stuff like that for the Platters. I did an album for Sonny.
And Rick, you've been around the block.
I have.
I didn't know you'd done all this stuff, man.
Yep, did that.
Wow.
And then we kind of outgrew our building, and actually what happened was where our place was in an older strip mall where our studio was, and we were next door to Bob Jones University. Bob Jones University wound up buying the strip mall, and so because we were going to re-up, we had a good deal there on rent, and they were super nice. They came in and said, "Look, we're not running you out. You know, it's going to be a while before we use it, but we don't want to re-sign any leases. You know, we'd like for you to be finding a place to move." So we had to start looking at moving, and Mark V Recording Studios was also in Greenville, and they'd been around, like I said, since '61, and was very well known in the industry, especially in Southern gospel industry. And they had a great studio, great facility there. And we were sitting around, we'd looked at some places, scratching our head about trying to figure out what we're going to do, And my partner at the time, I said, you know, why don't we call the Huffmans and see if they're interested in selling it? Because I knew Joe Huffman, who had moved to Nashville. He was one of the brothers that started Mark V, and he'd had quite a bit of success here in Nashville. And he was no longer really involved in the business, even though he was an owner. And the other two brothers were in the plating business. So the studio was primarily run by his niece and nephew. And his nephew, their nephew, which I knew him, he had just moved to Nashville. So I knew there was not a lot going on over there. So I called them up and asked if they'd be interested in selling the place. Long story short, we bought it. Basically, we wound up buying it, combining our two businesses. And we built a second room in the building. So we had a Studio A and Studio B because of all the commercial work we were doing at the time. That kind of work that they'll call you up in the morning and want to be in there at 10 o'clock to do something. So you don't book way ahead for that stuff. You got to be available if you're going to do it.
So did you get the studio and the label when you bought it?
Yeah, we bought everything. We bought the land, building, equipment, name, everything.
Yeah.
We bought the whole works. And so that's how I wound up with Mark V. And of course, Mark V is very well known in the Southern gospel world, but had not been very active in recent years. When we bought it in 1987.
Yeah.
But we were when we bought it, we did some promotion and stuff, and it was, clicking on all cylinders. We were very busy, very busy. We kept both rooms booked pretty solid at the time. And then I knew that Mark V had a label. And of course, I had a little bit of a label experience. And so we started, initially, there was a couple of groups already signed to the label when we bought the company, a group called the Buxtons and a group called the Regals. And I think Scott Wagner was with the Regals at the time, which you may know. He's in a group called the Carolina now.
Yeah, I know Scott.
But anyway, one of the things I noticed, we were recording a lot of, groups that were not professional. There was a lot of those coming in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the perception for Southern gospel at the time was it was basically old people's music,
Yeah.
And so, of course, I've been more involved in contemporary. I knew the Southern gospel world, knew people in it, but I had not been that involved in it for a few years. And I noticed that most of the groups that were coming in and cutting, the wannabe groups, for lack of a better word, were young. I'm thinking, I said, if this is old people's music, why are all these young people coming in here, recording this stuff?
Yeah.
And so I would talk to my partners about it. I said, we should find some really good young groups, young Southern gospel groups, and sign them. And because I think there's an audience out there for it, based on what I'm seeing here.
Mm-hmm.
So we signed the Martins.
Yeah.
Perfect Heart, who were young at the time.
Yeah.
And the Anchorman. They were young at the time.
Yeah.
The Anchorman lineup was pretty interesting at the time. That was Terry Carter on baritone, David Sutton on tenor, Jeff Chapman on bass, and Bonnie English, Mike English's brother, was singing lead.
Yeah.
It was a great quartet. They had a great quartet.
Yeah, they were.
But of course, Perfect Heart had, that's a long story. But we had a lot of success with them. We had the first single we put out on them was Song of the Year. Went to #1. First time that ever happened in Southern Gospel for
what was
a
the name
premier
of the song?
release. Somebody Touched the Lord.
Somebody Touched the Lord. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the first time that ever happened at the time for a premier single on a new group to go to #1.
Danny Funderburk was in that group then.
Danny Funderburk. That was Danny Funderburk, Dale Shipley, Mark Lanier, and Mike Shipley was on bass.
Now, was this after the Cathedrals, right?
Yes.
He had left the Cathedrals. Yeah. Started his own group. Yeah.
It was interesting. The way I wound up working with them was and Jeff Stice also. He was the piano player in the group. And Jeff's actually the reason I wound up working with him. And I still work. Jeff and I still do some work together. He doesn't live that far from me now. He comes down. We do some stuff together every once in a while. But I had a guy working for me that knew Jeff. I didn't even know him at the time, and he came to me and told me about Jeff. He was playing for the Nealons at the time.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, this guy he wants to do a piano record. He's going, he's with the Nealons, and he'll, sell it on the road and blah, 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 this, that, and the other. Would you be interested in doing it?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So that's how I got to know Jeff. He actually came up, we signed him to the label and did a piano record for Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
So after that, Jeff quits the Nealons and goes with Perfect Heart. And so that whole story, I don't know how many people know that story, but because a lot of the people in the industry were kind of mad at the guys in Perfect Heart because they'd left all these other big groups and formed.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people would not work with them. There was a lot of people that didn't want to get involved with them because people in the industry that were kind of upset at them. And
I've experienced that before.
Right. So Jeff calls me and says, "Man, we need to do a record bad. We're out singing. We have no product." And I wasn't involved enough in the industry to care, to be honest, what other people thought.
Yeah.
I looked at it basically, would this work for us and them? That's the way I looked at it.
Yeah.
And I looked at it. I thought, I can't see any reason not to do this. So we wound up doing that first record for them, and it was a big success. So, it worked out really well. But that's kind of how I wound up getting more involved on the Southern Gospel side of things.
So you said you signed the Martins. Was there did you have any success with the Martins? They're very successful now. So
yeah, we were kind of the precursor to their success.
Yeah.
To be honest, I had some success with the Martins. I would say we had success in the sense that I think when the Martins worked with us, a lot more people found out who they were.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of commercial success with the Martins when they were with us, but we were able to expose them to a lot more people, which I think was good for them, and I was happy with that aspect of it. They were kids.
Yeah.
When we signed them, their mom and daddy had to sign the contract because they were too young.
Oh yeah.
When we signed them, but we heard them. Actually, my business partner heard them at the time. We were at the NQC setting up a booth before it opened up, and he heard somebody singing a cappella. Thought, "Man, that sounds great." So he walked around, and they were at their booth standing there singing for some radio DJ.
Yeah.
And so he got to talking to him. That's how we met, and one thing led to another. We wound up signing them. I did 3 album projects for the Martins.
Wow.
But they're great people. I love the Martins.
Probably around that same time, we used to go sing in their hometown, or if we were anywhere close to where they grew up, Hamburg, Arkansas,
Hamburg, yeah.
they would come to see us, and
Right.
we would take a break for intermission,
Right.
and they'd get up and sing a couple of songs during the offering. We'd let them go and sing a
Right.
couple of songs, and we'd stay
Right.
at their house. And
Right.
we got our bus stuck in their yard one time. I think Jonathan says the ruts are still there. So we got to know them real good too. And I saw the potential too. I knew they were going to be something, eventually.
Right.
And
they were so talented. They just oozed with talent. Those kids do. Well, they're not kids anymore, but
no.
Yeah, they are. I got to see them recently on the. Every now and then I work on the Huckabee show. A friend of mine's kind of the head audio guy over there, and they'll call me every once in a while if somebody's out and they need help. So
yeah,
he called me one time. The Martins were on, and so I got to see him, talk to him.
That's cool.
We got to reminisce a little bit.
So you've done a lot of stuff in the past few years with Three Bridges, Elliot McCoy, Three Bridges. Yep. Yeah, I think you helped them do their first project, didn't you?
I did. We did it at my house. Most of it in my house, basically. Elliot's a good longtime friend, way before Three Bridges, and of course we used to all go to church together.
Yeah.
Right. That's how I knew Elliot, actually, out from Cornerstone, and and he called me up. You'll probably remember this, but we did a July the 4th special at church, and Shelley sang a song called "Dear Captain."
Yes.
First time a friend of hers wrote it, and I don't think it had ever been recorded at the time or anything. It was the first time anybody ever heard it outside of her friend who wrote it.
It was it was after 9/11.
After 9/11, it was about praying for the president.
George W. Bush was president. It was
right.
About praying for the president, yeah.
Yeah. So Elliot, who used to sing, he sang in several groups over the years, and sang with the Statesman for the New Statesman for a while, and then sang with tons of groups up in Ohio. I think the Chariots was one of them, and I can't remember all the groups he sang with, but you'll have to ask him if you.
I'm hoping to have him on here pretty soon. I've sent him a Facebook message, but I haven't heard back from him. So
he's got some great. Yeah, he's got some great stories.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Elliot came over to the house that Sunday evening, called me up, and I actually had recorded that service. I had it on a DAT tape, and he said, "Did you record that?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want to come over and listen to that song." So he came over. We sat there in my studio and listened, and he said, "I'm going to start a group." And I said, "Why in the world would you do that?" And he was like, and he said, "I want to sing." He said, "I moved here to sing, and I'm not singing, so I want to sing." So he started the group, and he had got Mitch, was in our choir at the time.
Yep.
And he was looking for a tenor, and Steve Blanton, who's a friend of mine, actually lived close to me at the time. I knew him. We actually knew each other in Greenville. He's from the Greenville, South Carolina area.
Uh-huh.
And I knew Steve's a great singer. He's not really a Southern gospel singer, but he's a great singer. And so I told him, I said, "You ought to call Steve," because I knew Steve was in a situation where he could do it at the time. And so Steve wound up working with him. So that's how it formed the group. And we did the tracks. David Floyd did a lot of the track work for it for me. And we did all the vocals and stuff and mixed it all down in my basement at the time, my studio.
Yeah.
And that they ain't looked back since. And I've done several. I've produced, I don't know, probably 9 or 10 of their records over the years.
That's awesome.
Something like that. But yeah, they're great. They're great. I got on one of their hats.
But, you know what that is? That was.
It's a 3B. 3B.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. It almost looks like the New York Yankees.
Right, I know.
A little bit when you first look at it.
Shannon Smith, who's their lead singer, he probably designed this then because he's a big Yankees fan.
Oh yeah, probably so. Man, you've been all over the place. You've done several projects for me and my family, and when I was with Heritage Road, we did all of our stuff with you. So everything that I've got, everything that people hear, our CDs, it was because it was Rick, so got to give him a lot of credit.
Thank you.
A lot of people don't know terminology and things like that. When we say certain things, they don't understand what tracking means.
Right.
They don't know what overdubs mean
Right.
mixing. You know, they think
Right.
mixing, you get a, you know, a pot, make a cake mixing.
Right. It's a little bit like
Mastering and all that
Yeah.
stuff. They don't know.
Right.
A lot of people don't know what that means. So start
Right.
off with what is tracking? What is that?
Tracking usually means that's when you're recording the music. You're actually recording the music. It's called tracking these days because there's multiple tracks being recorded.
Yes.
If you're recording a band, a combo, I call them, like bass, drums, piano, and guitar, then everything's going down to separate tracks. Like on a drum set, for instance, you can have, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 tracks going down just for drums.
What do you mean when you say tracks? What are you
Separate
talking about?
individual channels.
Individual channels, and they all
like,
record.
Like the kick drum will be on one.
And it records,
one track,
and it records just that. It records just that one.
Yeah,
thing.
just that one thing. Yeah, right. And then and everything's like that. Bass is on the track, guitars on the track, and then of course all the vocals. Once you record those, these days most of the time, very rarely do vocals go down with the tracking. It's usually a scratch, what we call a scratch vocal, which is just for the band to listen to how the song goes. And then once the music's done or tracking's done, then the singers come in and we work on doing the vocals, getting those right.
Back in the old days, they just cut it all at the same time.
Speaking of that, I'm actually working on a lot of that right now. I signed a contract back in the fall with a company called Syntax Creative, and they're putting all my old masters up on the internet for me for downloads and streaming and all that kind of stuff, YouTube and all that. And so I've been going back and pulling out old masters. Of course, Mark V goes back into the 60s. Some of the recordings do that was on their label. So I've been pulling out some of that old stuff that was.
See, that's another term. You say masters.
Right.
What is that?
The master is the final mix. In other words, once the song is done, that's the master.
Okay.
So it can be on, it's like I've got, because of my age, I've got all kinds of masters sitting around here because I've lived through several technology changes.
Yes.
But I got analog 2-track masters here. I got DAT masters. I have ADAT multi-tracks as well as 2-inch analog multi-tracks.
Wow.
And then I've got digital recordings saved to DVDs, to hard drives, to USB sticks.
How do you keep up with all that?
DAT tape masters. I got them all here in my studio, so I'm surrounded with that stuff.
So going back to the recording process, okay, you talked about tracking, and then coming in, the vocals come in and they sing with the tracks.
Right.
And you're still not done. I mean, you gotta
mix
overdubs.
Overdubs. If you need extra stuff done, that means, for instance, you might cut a band track. Singers get done, you think, and you listen to it and you go, that really could use some strings, or it could use steel guitar, or it might
fiddle,
fiddle or whatever it needs. And that's an overdub. In other words, an overdub means it's being not recorded during the tracking, but it's done later.
Somebody comes in that plays a fiddle or a mandolin, and he sits in the studio and does his part.
Right.
After the tracking and the vocals have already been done.
Right, exactly.
That's just an add-on thing. So.
Right. Yep.
Which is totally different now because they don't actually go to the studio like they used to.
Yeah, that's a whole other technology change. Yeah. It's happened the past couple of years.
Most musicians these days, studio musicians especially, have their own software on their laptops at home, and they can. That's a whole nother thing to talk about.
Right. Yeah.
You can send. You can email files.
Yeah, I do it all the time.
Music is a WAV file.
Right.
So you can just email the track to somebody, and they can sit there with their little software, their Pro Tools or whatever they use.
Right.
Put their part on it and email it back to you, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool.
I do it. Yeah, I do it all the time.
So then you do overdubs, and then after you get everything done, then you start mixing.
That's my favorite part.
That's what takes the most time.
Right. Yeah. It takes a lot of time, and that's where, the rubber meets the road as far as the sound goes.
That's where the magic happens right there.
Right.
Yeah. So in the mixing process, I've watched you do it, and I've tried to do some myself, but I'm not near what you are. But there's a lot of cleanup you have to do.
Right.
Track.
Clean the
you
tracks
may have
up.
Somebody say something after you sing a line and you didn't get that cut off, in the recording. You got to cut that off, and smacking and, sniffing and stuff like that between lines.
The great thing about today's technology is that's a lot easier to do than it used to be.
Yes, it is.
The good thing about digital recordings is that the files are a lot more easily manipulated than it used to be.
Yeah.
In analog, it was pretty much, once it was on the analog, that was it. You had to clean stuff up while you were mixing it before, which required a lot of effort. We did get into automated mixing in the latter days of analog, but even that had its challenges. So,
see, a lot of people don't know it, but and I hate to give away secrets, but a lot of times if you sing a chorus of a song and you get a good chorus, you can just use that one chorus for the next two choruses, unless there's a key change.
Yeah, you do what we call flying.
It's the same.
You can.
I should have said that because people think we're cheating now.
Hey, it's been done forever. You listen to the Beatles or all these people. Even in the analog days, they used to do that.
Everybody does it.
They'd make a copy of that chorus and edit it in on the analog tape.
Still sitting there singing all day long, trying to get another good chorus. It's just, take the good one and go with it.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. So, and then after all the mixing and getting everything, the sounds, the compression, the EQ, and everything, the reverbs and all that stuff, the delays.
Right.
Then comes the final thing, which is mastering. What is that?
Right. Well, that's a debatable question, actually, because mastering is not what it used to be. Originally, when I first started doing recordings, we did albums. The final process was an album.
Yeah.
And when you do albums, mastering is required. It's not an option. It's required. Because
why is that?
Well, you have to, the recordings in the studio in those days were on analog tape. And so the analog tape had to be transferred to a disc.
Okay.
And the disc, from the disc, they made a stamp, a metal stamp. And then the stamp actually stamps the vinyl out, the melted vinyl into
I always wondered how they made those.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's starts out as a big glob of molten vinyl, basically. And they make stamps with the imprint of the album, the music on it.
So it's more or less vibrations that cause the
vibrations is what you're hearing, yeah.
That's amazing. And who thought of that?
I don't know. I guess Edison was the first one to, the first recording thing he had was a needle running over bumps, basically.
Yeah.
The same thing. That's all vinyl was, same thing. But yeah, and it's an interesting thing to me about vinyl, because there's a lot of people, vinyl's kind of making a comeback.
Yeah.
But if you know the technology, it's not all that great. Vinyl's not all that great.
Yeah.
I'd much rather have a CD of a recording.
Yeah. But over time, that needle will get pops and cracks in there.
Right. Well, not only that, the one thing people don't know about vinyl is there's no bottom end on those records. You can't put bottom end on vinyl because it would bump the needle. It would bump the needle off of the record.
Huh.
And so when they master those, the actual mastering, part of the mastering process is to take the bottom end off of it.
That makes sense, because I remember when I was a kid growing up, we'd have a record player, and I like to hear the bass.
Right.
If I start cranking up the bass, it would start skipping.
Right. Well, that was probably your speakers. That was probably your speakers vibrating.
Well, yeah, it was.
But if you know that, I don't know if you've ever done this or not. I know a lot of people have. I did when I was younger. if you ever plug a turntable into a stereo without a preamp, it sounds awful. That's because that's because you're actually hearing what it actually sounds like. The preamp is what rolls the bottom back on the recording.
Uh-huh.
It's a standard curve they use, and that they're all supposed to be the same, but I don't think they are. So I think the quality of the preamp matters as far as what you're listening to. But it rolls at the vinyl record itself has no bottom end on it, so you have to roll that. It has to be rolled back on by a preamp, and so it's just, to me, it's all questionable quality. CDs, there's no limit to dynamic range on CD like there is on analog and vinyl. And if I want to really hear a recording, I'd rather listen on CD.
Oh, sure. Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Man. So, so the process of finishing a recording is nowadays is mastering. So,
well, you could do, what I was going to say is that the technical part of mastering is actually not required anymore unless you're doing vinyl.
Oh, really? But you still do. I mean, you master.
A lot of people still do it.
You master my projects. Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically the final step as far as you kind of listen to the mix, and if there anything, you can't like go in and pull something out up like a vocal or that kind of mixing, but you can change things like overall EQ, maybe a little more compression to make it hotter sounding.
Right.
Spread the stereo out a little bit if you need to. The different things you can do to kind of enhance the mix, the sound of the mix. The other important thing about mastering is levels, and that is the levels from song to song, getting those right.
You want them all to be even,
when
you're listening to a CD, you want everything to be the same volume, kind of.
Yeah, as even as possible. I mean, it's not going to be, there's no way to get them all exactly the same because songs are different.
Yeah.
And so, the dynamics range is different on songs. So
it is.
So it's just but I do it by ear mostly. I do that part by ear, by my sight. I listen to it, see, kind of see how it sounds. Does it sound too loud or does it sound not loud enough? I'll go through and I'll make some adjustments like that so that has a good feel if you're listening through to the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely full of knowledge, man. And you've been there and done that, and you've done some great projects for me and Heritage Road and Three Bridges and Martins.
I appreciate that.
A bunch of people out there. And so now that gives people a little more perspective of what goes on, how important your job is, when they hear a song on the radio. Guys like you are what makes it sound good. So
yeah, we try.
Yeah,
we try. There's a lot of guys in this town that are great at doing that. So
yeah, oh yeah, there's a lot of home studios these days.
Oh yeah,
people learning more and more. So, but I mean, if there's anybody out there listening to this that are thinking about recording a project and you want a good one, I mean a good sounding one, you need to look up Rick Sandidge. He's on Facebook. You have a website, Rick?
I do. It's for mark5co.com.
Mark 5, which is it MARK, the number 5?
FIVE.
FIVE. Co.
Co.com. Co.com.
Mark 5 Co.
For Mark 5 Company, yeah. Mark 5 CO, and it's spelled out.
Look him up, and I guarantee he'll do you right. He won't try to overcharge you, and you'll get the best sounding project you could ever have. I mean, he puts a lot of time. I'm telling you from experience. I sit there and watch him. I go over to his house while he's doing all the mixing and everything and mastering, and he is so particular about things. He won't let anything slide. So, I mean,
try not to.
He's great. So y'all need to look him up if you're thinking about recording. Rick, thanks so much.
Thank you, man.
Taking time to do this.
Yeah,
I think that opens up people's eyes at what actually goes on and behind the scenes and everything. So we really appreciate it, man.
All right. Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
Take care of yourself, and you stay safe and don't get that virus. All right.
All right. Yeah, I'm doing that. I'm trying not to do that for sure.
And I'll be talking to you. So we'll go out to eat again, and I'll be talking to you soon about doing some more recording pretty soon.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Man. You're the man.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks a lot. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.